He was the city's most dangerous phantom, a syndicate boss who controlled the shadows. He needed a simple prop for a high-stakes dinner, a docile, fake wife to secure a billion-dollar port deal. But due to a rival's sabotage, the agency sent the wrong woman. She wasn't a size 0 model. She was a fiercely intelligent, plus-size force of nature who refused to shrink herself for anyone. He ordered her to sit still and keep quiet. Instead, she completely hijacked his empire. Listen closely, because this is the story of a dinner party that changed the underworld. The air inside the Madison Avenue office of Laura Companions smelled of panic, expensive vanilla room spray, and burnt espresso. Penelope Gallagher, known to everyone simply as Penny, stared at the chaos unfolding around her with a familiar sense of exasperation. As the operations manager of New York's most exclusive, highly vetted escort and acting agency for corporate billionaires, she was used to putting out fires. But today, the fire was a raging inferno. 3 of their top-tier operatives, women who were paid 5 figures a night to play the role of flawless, highly educated arm candy, were currently incapacitated. A rival's syndicate had managed to slip a potent, fast-acting foodborne pathogen into the agency's daily delivery of organic green juice. "They're all down, Penny," cried out Arthur, the agency's frantic owner, clutching his sparse hair. "Genevieve is hooked up to an IV at Mount Sinai. Clara can't even stand up. And the client is going to be here in 10 minutes. Penny, a 28-year-old woman whose brilliant mind was often overlooked in favor of the lithe, skeletal figures she managed, tapped her manicured nails against her mahogany desk. She was a size 18, proudly carrying a lush, full-figured silhouette in a world that demanded size 0s. She wore a tailored burgundy wrap dress that hugged her generous curves, her dark hair pinned up in a no-nonsense twist. "Who is the client, Arthur?" "You've kept this file highly classified all week," Penny said, her voice a calm anchor in the stormy room. Before Arthur could answer, the frosted glass doors of the agency shattered the quiet. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Damien Rousseau did not just enter a room. He commanded it. Standing at 6'3", broad-shouldered and carved from pure hostility, the head of the Rousseau crime family was a man whispered about in the darkest corners of Wall Street and the underground docks. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that probably cost more than Penny's yearly rent. His dark eyes, sharp as shattered obsidian, swept the room, instantly cataloging the panic. Behind him stood Matteo, his stoic enforcer, hand resting casually near the inside of his tailored jacket. Arthur Damien's voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth. "I am here for my wife. I trust she has memorized the dossier on Harrison Whitmore's shipping logistics." Arthur swallowed hard, his face draining of color. "Mr. Rousseau, sir, we have a slight situation." Damien's jaw tightened. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man's windpipe. "Explain, now." As Arthur stammered through the explanation of the poisoned green juice, Damien's expression darkened into something lethal. Tonight was not just a dinner at the exclusive private club, The Core. It was a negotiation with Harrison Whitmore, a notoriously traditional and fiercely stubborn shipping magnate who held the keys to the Brooklyn naval yards. Whitmore only did business with family men. He despised bachelors, viewing them as untrustworthy and volatile. Damien had hired the agency to provide a brilliant, stunning fake wife to secure a billion-dollar port deal that would legitimize his family's empire for generations. "You have no one," Damien concluded, his voice dangerously soft. "You took a $100,000 retainer, and you have no one." "We can reschedule," Arthur began. "Whitmore flies to London at midnight." Damien cut him off, stepping closer to Arthur. There is no rescheduling. If I walk into that dinner alone, the deal is dead. And if the deal is dead, Arthur, so is this agency. Literally, Penny had heard enough. She pushed her chair back, the sound scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Both Damien and Matteo snapped their attention to her. Actually, Penny said, her voice steady as she walked around her desk, I wrote the dossier you're talking about, Mr. Russo. Genevieve and Clara were just going to memorize my talking points. I know Whitmore's entire portfolio, his union disputes and his tax loopholes. Damien looked at her, really looked at her. His gaze was analytical, sweeping over her full hips, her prominent breasts, and the soft, rounded lines of her face. It wasn't a look of disgust, but of cold, hard calculation. You're the operations manager, Damien said dismissively. You don't fit the profile. Penny felt a familiar spark of defiance ignite in her chest. She had spent her entire life being told she didn't fit the profile of a starving, submissive trophy wife who nods and smiles. No, I don't. But you don't need a trophy tonight, Mr. Russo. You need a closer. Whitmore is a shark, and if you bring a bleeding fish to the table, he's going to eat you alive. Matteo chuckled, a low, raspy sound that he quickly disguised as a cough when Damien shot him a glare. Damien took a step toward Penny, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cedarwood, danger, and a hint of fine Macallan whiskey. He towered over her, expecting her to shrink back. She didn't budge, holding her ground and meeting his icy glare with warm, unyielding hazel eyes. You are not trained for the field, Damien said softly, leaning in. I have a degree in behavioral economics from Columbia, and I've been feeding lines through an earpiece to your perfect models for 3 years. Penny countered without missing a beat. You have exactly 2 options. You walk out of here and lose your billion-dollar empire, or you put a ring on my finger and we go win you a shipping port. Damien studied the fire in her eyes. The clock was ticking. It was 5:15 p.m. The dinner was at 8 p.m. He was a man of cold, hard pragmatism, and right now the fat woman with the fiery temper was his only life raft. Matteo, Damien barked without breaking eye contact with Penny. Call Antonella on 5th Avenue. Tell her to clear the floor. We have an emergency fitting. He finally stepped back, adjusting his cuffs. You have 2 hours to become Mrs. Russo, God help us both. The black Maybach cut through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan like a predator on the prowl. Inside the cavernous, leather-scented cabin, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Penny sat on the opposite side of the plush leather seat, staring out the tinted window at the blurred city lights. She felt entirely different, yet completely herself. The emergency trip to Antonella's boutique had been a whirlwind of a measuring tape, pins, and frantic Italian shouting. Damien had demanded perfection, throwing out 3 different dresses because they looked cheap before pointing to a masterpiece hidden in the back room. It was a midnight blue velvet gown, custom designed with a sweetheart neckline that showcased her ample cleavage tastefully, a corseted bodice that cinched her waist, and a dramatic, sweeping skirt that flowed elegantly over her wide hips. Antonella's tailors had worked a miracle, altering it in under an hour. When Penny had emerged from the dressing room, the entire boutique had gone dead silent. She had caught Damien's reflection in the mirror. For a fraction of a second, the cold Mafia boss's mask had slipped, revealing a flash of raw, unfiltered hunger as his eyes traced the voluptuous curve of her hips. But the mask had slammed back into place so quickly she thought she might have imagined it. Now, adorned with a cool $2 million worth of rented Cartier diamonds, including a breathtaking sapphire collar and a massive, blinding emerald-cut engagement ring, she looked exactly like the wife of an underworld kingpin. Not because she was skinny, but because she radiated power. "Let's get a few things straight." Damien's voice broke the silence, pulling her from her thoughts. He was nursing a crystal tumbler of scotch from the car's minibar. Harrison Whitmore is a traditionalist. His wife, Eleanor, is old money. Mayflower bloodline. They expect respect, deference, and a specific dynamic. "You mean they expect me to be a prop?" Penny clarified, turning to face him. I expect you to follow my lead," Damien said, his jaw tight. "I do the talking. You smile, you laugh at his terrible jokes, and you look at me like the sun shines out of my ass. If the conversation turns to the docks, you divert Eleanor with talk about charity galas or high art. Do not interrupt me." Penny crossed her legs, the velvet of her gown whispering loudly in the quiet car. She picked up the encrypted tablet, resting on the seat between them, tapping the screen to bring up the Whitmore file. "I reviewed the proposal you're handing him tonight," Penny said casually, ignoring his orders. "Your offer for the Brooklyn Naval Yard is $40 million under market value. You're justifying it by offering him a percentage of the offshore logistics network. It's a standard aggressive opening bid." Damien snapped, annoyed that she was questioning his business acumen. "We negotiate from there." "It's a flawed bid," Penny corrected him smoothly. "You missed the local 342 union tax hike that got passed quietly last Tuesday. If Whitmore accepts your logistics percentage, he assumes the tax liability. He knows that. If you hand him this proposal, he's going to think you're either stupid or trying to screw him. He'll walk before the appetizers arrive." Damien froze, his tumbler stopping halfway to his mouth. He stared at her, his dark eyes narrowing. "Where did you get that information? The union hike isn't public yet." "I told you I manage logistics for billionaires," Penny said with a sweet, dangerous smile. "And my uncle is a shop steward at local 342. I pay attention, Damien. You should, too." The use of his first name hung in the air. He hadn't given her permission to use it so informally behind closed doors. The sheer audacity of this woman was grating on his nerves, yet deep down, a strange thrill of respect coiled in his gut. "Fine," Damien said slowly, setting his glass down. "We restructure the offer. We absorb the tax liability in exchange for full operational control of Pier 4. "Exactly," Penny nodded. "Now you're thinking like a businessman, not a thug." Matteo, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, let out a loud, unmistakable snort of laughter. "Keep your eyes on the road, Matteo," Damien growled, though he didn't raise his voice. He turned back to Penny, leaning across the plush seat until he was inches from her face. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating, a heavy mix of dominance and danger. "You are playing a dangerous game, Mia Mowgli." "My wife," he whispered, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes. "Tonight, we are swimming with sharks. You may be smart, but you do not know the violence these men are capable of. Stick to the script, Penelope. If you step out of line and blows deal, there won't be a place on this earth you can hide from me." Penny didn't flinch. She leaned in just a fraction, matching his intensity. "If I stick to your script, Damien, you lose. Let me do what you're paying my agency for." The Maybach rolled to a smooth stop. Outside, the grand, imposing facade of the Core Club loomed, flanked by armed valets and paparazzi, kept at bay by velvet ropes. "Showtime," Penny whispered. Damien stared at her for one more second before adjusting his tie. He stepped out of the car, the flashbulbs immediately erupting into a blinding storm. He turned, offering his hand to her. Penny placed her gloved hand in his. As she stepped out of the vehicle, the cameras went into overdrive. This wasn't the usual stick-thin blonde Damien Russo was photographed with. This was a queen stepping out of a chariot. She held her head high, the midnight velvet draping flawlessly over her thick, gorgeous curves, the Cartier diamonds catching the city lights. Damien pulled her tightly against his side, his large hand resting firmly on the curve of her hip. It was meant to be a possessive, territorial grip for the cameras, but Penny felt a strange electric jolt shoot through her at his touch. "Smile, darling," Damien murmured in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Let's go rob them blind." The private dining room at the core was a masterclass in intimidating opulence. Dark mahogany walls, dimly lit crystal chandeliers, and a massive oak table set for four. Sitting at the head of the table was Harrison Whitmore, a man whose wrinkles looked like they had been carved by a scalpel. Beside him sat his wife, Eleanor, a woman so thin and tightly wound she looked like a walking diamond-encrusted skeleton. As Damien and Penny entered, the heavy oak doors closing silently behind them, the atmosphere shifted. Harrison stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Russo," Harrison barked, his voice like grinding stones. "You made it." "Harrison, a pleasure," Damien replied smoothly, radiating an aura of absolute control. "May I introduce my wife, Penelope?" Eleanor Whitmore's eyes immediately swept over Penny. It was the classic, judgmental scan of high society, a silent calculus of brand names, tailoring, and body mass index. Eleanor's thin lips curled into a barely concealed sneer as she took in Penny's plus-size figure. "Penelope," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "How refreshing." We were beginning to think Damien would never settle down. "I must say, you aren't the usual type of girl we see him with in the tabloids. You have such a brave figure. It's lovely to see someone who clearly enjoys life's indulgences." It was a classic mean girl microaggression, designed to put the fat girl in her place. Damien stiffened beside Penny, his hand tightening on her hip. He opened his mouth to intervene, a cold threat ready to spill from his lips, but Penny beat him to it. Penny smiled, a warm, radiant, and utterly unbothered smile. She gracefully took her seat, letting the expensive velvet pool around her. "Thank you, Eleanor," Penny said, her voice like warm honey. "I've always found that a life devoid of indulgence is hardly a life at all." And Damien agrees. He always tells me he prefers a woman with enough substance to hold her own in a storm, rather than one who might blow away in a stiff breeze. She delivered the line with perfect, innocent charm, but the underlying strike was lethal. Eleanor's face flushed an ugly shade of puce as she realized she had just been called fragile and insignificant. Harrison let out a booming, unexpected laugh. "She's got teeth, Russo." "I like her," Harrison chuckled, waving for the sommelier to pour the wine. "All right, let's skip the pleasantries. We're eating the Wagyu, we're drinking the 82 Bordeaux, and we're talking about the Brooklyn docks." The dinner commenced, a highly choreographed dance of Michelin star courses and thinly veiled threats. Damien was masterful, steering the conversation with a cold, calculated precision. But as they reached the main course, Harrison leaned back, tossing his napkin onto the table. "Your proposal is garbage, Damien," Harrison said bluntly. "You want the naval yard for 40 million under market, and you want to toss me a scrap of your offshore logistics. I don't need your logistics. I have my own." Damien didn't blink. "My logistics network bypasses the current customs bottleneck at Port Newark. It saves you 3 days of holding time. Time is money, Harrison. It also assumes the tax liability of the new union hikes, which you conveniently left out of your prospectus." Harrison countered, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "You think I don't read the fine print? You're trying to saddle me with a massive overhead. The deal is dead, Russo. You're a gangster trying to play shipping magnate, and you just showed a hand." Damien's jaw clenched so hard Penny thought his teeth might shatter. He was cornered. Harrison was ending the negotiation exactly as Penny had predicted in the car. Damien was calculating his next move, likely something violent or coercive, when Penny did the unthinkable. She reached out, gently placing her manicured hand over Damien's clenched fist on the table. She broke the golden rule. She spoke up during the business negotiation. "Harrison," Penny said, her tone shifting from the charming wife to something sharp and authoritative. "If I may." "Penelope, no," Damien warned, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. Harrison raised an eyebrow, amused. "Let her speak, Russo. I want to hear what the brave girl has to say." Penny ignored Damien's deadly glare. She looked dead center into Harrison Whitmore's eyes. "Damien didn't omit the union tax hike to trick you, Harrison. He left it out because it's irrelevant to the structural framework he's actually offering. You're looking at the offshore logistics as a standard transfer of assets. That's a mistake." Harrison stopped chewing. "A mistake? Yes. You're assuming the ships will dock at Pier 4. Penny lied flawlessly, recalling a loophole she had read about in maritime law weeks ago. "If we reclassify the offshore logistics network as an independent fleet under a Panamanian flag, which Damien already has the Shell Corporation set up for, the cargo doesn't officially enter the union's jurisdiction until it's offloaded by secondary, non-union barges." The room went dead silent. Eleanor looked confused. Damien stared at Penny, utterly shell-shocked. He didn't have Shell Corporation set up for that. But he recognized a brilliant million-dollar bluff when he heard one. "You bypass the local 342 tax entirely," Penny continued smoothly, taking a delicate sip of her Bordeaux. "It saves you the overhead, cuts the holding time, and gives you complete operational control of Pier 4. We absorb the initial $40 million cut on the naval yard to fund the secondary barges. It's not a trick, Harrison. It's a tax shelter, and it will save you $80 million in the first fiscal year alone." Harrison Whitmore sat frozen, his eyes darting between Damien and Penny. His mind was racing, calculating the math. Slowly, a massive, greedy grin spread across his heavily lined face. "A Panamanian flag loophole," Harrison whispered reverently. He looked at Damien with sudden, profound respect. "You sneaky son of a bitch. You let me think you were lowballing me just so you could spring a tax shelter on me." Damien, recovering his composure like the apex predator he was, leaned back and squeezed Penny's hand under the table. His thumb traced circles on her knuckles, sending a jolt of heat straight to her core. "I prefer to let my wife explain the finer points of our offshore holdings." Damien lied smoothly, his voice a dark purr. "She has a mind for logistics. I can see that." Harrison laughed, raising his glass to Penny. "To Mrs. Russo, a woman with beauty, brains, and a hell of a right hook." As the glasses clinked, Damien turned his head slightly, his lips brushing against Penny's ear. "I don't know whether to strangle you for interrupting me," he breathed, his voice dripping with dark promise, "or worship you for saving my empire." Penny turned her head, their noses mere inches apart. "I take a size 8.5 in worship," she whispered back, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She had just hijacked the biggest Mafia deal of the decade, and she was only just getting started. But as the waiter approached to clear the plates, carrying a silver tray with 4 espresso cups, Penny's sharp eyes caught a slight tremor in the man's hands. She noticed the way the waiter's eyes nervously darted toward Damien's cup. The high-stakes dinner wasn't just a negotiation. It was an assassination attempt, and the fat girl from the Bronx was about to show the underworld exactly how dangerous she could be. The private dining room was suffocatingly intimate, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans, truffles, and the intoxicating perfume of high-stakes victory. Harrison Whitmore was still chuckling, practically mentally counting the millions he was about to save via the Panamanian tax loophole Penny had just invented out of thin air. Eleanor Whitmore was glaring at her empty wineglass, effectively neutralized by Penny's earlier verbal strike. But Penny's attention was entirely fixated on the waiter, approaching Damien's right side. Her degree in behavioral economics wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a lens through which she viewed the world. People leaked their intentions through micro-expressions, posture, and kinetic energy. This waiter, dressed in the immaculate white jacket of the Corps' staff, was leaking pure adrenaline. His jaw was clenched so tightly the muscle twitched. His eyes were dilated despite the dim lighting. And most damning of all, he was entirely focused on the placement of the pristine white porcelain espresso cup designated for Damien. He didn't make eye contact. He was holding his breath. As the waiter leaned in, extending his silver tray, Damien reached out to take the cup. Penny didn't think. She acted. "Oh, darling!" Penny gasped loudly, throwing her hands up in an exaggerated, animated gesture as she turned sharply toward Damien. Her heavy velvet sleeve caught the edge of the silver tray. The collision was spectacular. The tray flipped, sending all 4 scalding espresso cups crashing down. But Penny had calculated the angle perfectly. The steaming, dark liquid splashed directly across the waiter's pristine white jacket and over his forearms, entirely missing Damien. "Ah!" the waiter hissed, jumping backward. But his reaction was wrong. A normal waiter at a Michelin star establishment would apologize profusely, even if burned. This man's hand instinctively dropped toward the small of his back, the universal tell of a man reaching for a concealed weapon. Matteo, standing silently by the door like a gargoyle in a custom suit, caught the movement in a fraction of a second. "My deepest apologies, my love. I am so impossibly clumsy when I'm excited," Penny cooed, grabbing Damien's lapels and pulling him slightly toward her out of the immediate line of fire. She looked into Damien's eyes, her hazel eyes wide, flashing a desperate, silent warning. Damien's survival instincts were legendary. He read the warning in her eyes instantly. Without breaking eye contact with his fake wife, Damien's left hand casually slid off the table, his fingers grazing the grip of the tactical blade strapped to his ankle. But Matteo was already moving. With terrifying silent speed, the enforcer crossed the room. He didn't draw a gun. That would alarm the Whitmores and blow the deal. Instead, Matteo placed a heavy, paternal hand on the waiter's shoulder, his thumb pressing violently in the cluster of nerves at the base of the man's neck. "Let me help you to the kitchens to treat that burn, friend," Matteo rumbled, his voice a gravelly purr that masked a lethal threat. He gripped the waiter's arm, twisting it just enough to keep the man's hand away from his waistband, and frog-marched him out of the oak doors before Harrison or Eleanor could even process the spill. "Good heavens!" Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearls. "The staff here has completely gone downhill." "I insist you forgive me, Harrison," Penny said smoothly, dabbing at a stray drop of coffee on the mahogany table with her napkin. "I was just so thrilled about our partnership moving forward. I tend to talk with my hands." Harrison laughed, waving off the incident entirely. "When you make me $80 million in 10 minutes, Penelope, you can smash all the china in the building for all I care. Damien, your wife, is a firecracker. You hold on to this one. If she ever leaves you, I'm hiring her to run my board." Damien stared at Penny. The mask of the calculating syndicate boss had momentarily slipped, replaced by a look of profound, chilling realization. He knew what she had just done. He knew what was in that cup. "I have every intention of holding on to her, Harrison," Damien said softly. His hand reached under the table, gripping Penny's thigh right above the knee. His large fingers dug into the soft, full flesh of her leg, a grip that was entirely possessive, grounding and trembling, with a violent undercurrent of adrenaline. "She is," irreplaceable. The rest of the evening was a blur of signatures. Harrison's Mont Blanc pen scratched across the leather-bound contracts, legally transferring the Brooklyn Naval Yard to the Rousseau family enterprise. When the final handshake was exchanged, Penny felt her knees threaten to buckle. As they walked out of the core, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi erupted once more. Damien pulled her flush against his side, his arm wrapping around her waist like an iron band. "Keep smiling," he murmured into her hair. "The night is far from over." The rain had intensified into a torrential downpour, slicking the black asphalt of Madison Avenue like a mirror. The Maybach tore through the city, the heavy V12 engine purring. Inside, the silence was deafening. Matteo was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes darting across the rearview mirrors. Damien poured 2 glasses of scotch from the crystal decanter, his movements sharp and rigid. He handed one to Penny. "Drink," he ordered. Penny took it, her hand shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was beginning to crash. The burn of the Macallan whiskey sliding down her throat was a harsh reminder that she was still alive. "Cyanide," Damien stated, staring at the darkened privacy glass. Matteo extracted the information from the waiter in the alley before snapping his neck. The espresso was laced with a synthesized cyanide compound. Colorless, odorless, fast. Penny closed her eyes, letting her head fall back against the plush leather. I saw his hand shake. He was terrified of the cup. Damien turned to her, his dark eyes ablaze with a mixture of fury and awe. "You risked blowing a billion-dollar deal. You risked your own life on a micro-expression." "I risked it because dead men can't sign contracts, Damien," Penny fired back, her voice finding its strength. "And because I don't let my clients get murdered on my watch. Call it a premium service of the agency." A dark, dangerous smirk tugged at the corner of Damien's mouth, but before he could respond, the Maybach violently lurched forward. A deafening crunch of metal on metal shattered the quiet as a heavily armored black SUV slammed into their rear bumper. Penny screamed, her glass flying from her hand and shattering against the partition. The force threw her forward, but Damien caught her instantly, his massive arm acting as a seatbelt, pinning her back against the seat and covering her body with his own. Matteo evasive. Damien roared, drawing a matte black Beretta from his shoulder holster in one fluid motion. "It's Lorenzo Costa's men, boss. They're trying to box us in," Matteo shouted through the open intercom, slamming his foot on the gas. The heavy Maybach swerved, its tires shrieking against the wet pavement as they narrowly dodged a civilian taxi, blowing through a red light at 80 miles an hour. A second SUV pulled up alongside them. The tinted window rolled down, revealing the dark muzzle of an automatic rifle. "Get down," Damien yelled, shoving Penny flat onto the floorboards. He rolled over her, using his broad back as a shield, just as the first spray of bullets hit the reinforced glass. The bulletproof windows spiderwebbed violently, groaning under the kinetic impact. "They have armor-piercing rounds. The glass won't hold for long," Matteo yelled, throwing the steering wheel hard to the right to sideswipe the attacker's vehicle. Sparks flew into the night as the 2 luxury behemoths ground against each other. Penny's heart was hammering against her ribs, deafening in her ears. She was pinned beneath Damien, the smell of his cedarwood cologne mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of gunpowder. She was terrified, but her brilliant mind was already running 100 miles an hour. "Matteo," Penny screamed over the roar of the engines. "Take the next left onto 47th Street. Are you crazy? It's the Diamond District. It's a bottleneck." Matteo yelled back. "Take the left," Penny commanded, her voice ringing with absolute unyielding authority. "I file the commercial shipping permits for my billionaires. The city authorized an underground utility excavation on 47th between 5th and 6th yesterday. The street is closed to wide-load traffic. There's a concrete barrier chute. Damien looked down at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Do it, Mateo." The Maybach screeched into a violent left turn, tires smoking despite the rain. The two pursuing SUVs followed close behind, their headlights blinding in the rearview mirrors. As they tore down 47th Street, the bright neon signs of the jewelry exchanges blurred past. Up ahead, massive concrete jersey barriers funneled the road into a space barely wider than a single car. "Thread the needle, Mateo," Damien ordered. The Maybach, sleek and meticulously engineered, scraped through the narrow opening, its side mirrors folding in with a crunch. The pursuing SUVs, heavily modified and significantly wider with their armored plating, realized the trap a second too late. The driver of the lead SUV slammed on the brakes, but the wet asphalt offered no traction. The massive vehicle plowed headfirst into the reinforced concrete barrier with a sickening, deafening crash. The second SUV, unable to stop in time, slammed into the back of the first. Metal crumpled, glass exploded, and the pursuit ended in a smoking, catastrophic pile-up. Mateo kept his foot on the gas, tearing out the other side of the chute and melting into the anonymity of the New York traffic grid. In the back seat, the silence returned, heavier this time. Damien slowly pulled himself off Penny, helping her sit up. Her intricate updo had fallen, dark waves framing her face. The velvet dress was slightly rumpled, but as she sat there, chest heaving, flushed with adrenaline, Damien had never seen a more breathtaking creature in his life. He didn't put his gun away. He just stared at her. "You," Damien breathed, his voice rough, "are an absolute menace." "You're welcome," Penny whispered, brushing a stray piece of shattered glass off her skirt. "Secure route to the Amman penthouse, Mateo," Damien ordered, never taking his eyes off her. 20 minutes later, they were inside Damien's private stronghold at the Amman, New York residences. It was a sprawling, minimalist masterpiece of dark stone, floor-to-ceiling glass, and soft ambient lighting overlooking Central Park. Penny stood by the massive windows, staring out at the city below, wrapping her arms around her full waist. She felt utterly out of her depth, yet strangely electrified. "You're shaking," Damien observed. He had discarded his jacket and holster, standing in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing heavily tattooed, muscular forearms. He walked toward her, holding a warm snifter of brandy. "I just survived an assassination attempt, negotiated a billion-dollar port deal, and caused a multi-car pileup," Penny said, offering a shaky laugh. "Shaking is the medically appropriate response." Damien stopped right behind her. He didn't offer her the glass. Instead, he placed his hands on her waist. His grip was firm, his thumbs resting against the flare of her hips. Penny gasped softly at the heat of his touch. "My entire life, I have been surrounded by women who are decorative, fragile. They shrink themselves to fit into a mold, to be invisible," Damien murmured, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear. "But you take up space. You demand to be seen. You are brilliant, Penelope, and you are magnificent." He slowly turned her around to face him. His dark eyes roamed over her face, dropping to the deep plunge of her velvet corset. There was no judgment, no backhanded compliments like Eleanor Whitmore's. It was raw, unadulterated worship. "I'm not the girl they put on the billboards, Damien," Penny whispered, her heart pounding a new, dangerous rhythm. "The girls on the billboards would have gotten me killed tonight," Damien replied, his voice a dark, rough velvet. He reached up, his large hand cupping her soft cheek. "I don't want a prop anymore. I want a queen." He leaned down, and Penny met him halfway. The kiss was explosive. It tasted of expensive brandy, danger, and a desperate burning hunger. Damien's hands tangled in her dark hair, pulling her flush against his hard, muscular frame. Penny wrapped her arms around his neck, sinking into the kiss, letting him feel every curve, every soft and solid inch of her. She had spent her life apologizing for her body, but right here, in the arms of the city's most lethal predator, she felt like a goddess. But the fantasy was about to be violently interrupted. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting a golden glow over the tangled silk sheets. Penny woke up slowly, every muscle in her body aching with a delicious, heavy exhaustion. She reached out, but the space beside her was empty. Damien was gone. Sitting up, pulling the silk sheet over her breasts, she noticed a handwritten note on the glass nightstand beside a steaming cup of coffee. "I am meeting with the 5 families to handle the Costa problem. Stay here. Matteo is outside the door. Do not leave under any circumstances." Penny smiled softly, the memory of his hands on her skin making her shiver. But as her mind cleared here, the operations manager in her snapped back into focus. The Whitmore deal was signed, but it wasn't secure. The Panamanian shell corporations she had lied about didn't actually exist. If Harrison Whitmore's lawyers started doing due diligence on Monday, they would find out Damien had committed massive corporate fraud. She needed to build the shell companies. Now, Penny threw off the sheets, pulling on a plush robe from the master bath. She grabbed her encrypted agency tablet, sitting at the massive marble kitchen island. Her fingers flew across the screen, accessing the dark web servers Arthur used for international client banking. She began weaving a digital tapestry, creating holding companies, backdating registration forms, and routing IP addresses through Central America. She was deep in the code when her cell phone buzzed. It was Arthur. "Arthur," Penny answered, typing furiously with one hand. "I can't talk right now. I'm literally building a corporate empire from scratch." "Penny." Arthur's voice was strained, a sickening tremble in his tone. "Penny, please." Penny froze. In the background of the call, she heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy slap, followed by a muffled groan from Arthur. Well, the brilliant Penelope Gallagher. The voice that came through the receiver next was smooth, slick, and dripping with malicious amusement. Lorenzo Costa, the head of the rival syndicate. "What do you want, Costa?" Penny demanded, her blood running cold. She stood up, walking quickly toward the penthouse door to alert Matteo. Stay right where you are, sweetheart," Costa warned, his voice sickeningly calm. "I have a sniper on the roof of the Pierre Hotel across the street. He has a thermal scope trained right on that gorgeous glass box you're standing in. You alert Damien's dog at the door, and my man puts a .50 caliber round through your skull." Penny stopped dead in her tracks, backing away from the windows slowly, keeping her breathing even. "You have Arthur," Penny stated, forcing her voice to remain analytical. "Panic would get them both killed. I have your boss, yes, and I have the real dossier on your little performance last night." Costa gloated. "My mole in your agency gave me everything. You're not Damien's wife. You're a glorified secretary who pulled a fast one on Harrison Whitmore, a fat little nobody playing Mafia queen." Penny didn't flinch at the insult. She used it. "If I'm a nobody, why are you calling me instead of Damien?" Costa chuckled, a dark, ugly sound. "Because Damien is currently sitting in a sit-down with the commission, surrounded by guards. He's untouchable right now. But you have access to his networks, and I want the port. Here is what is going to happen, Penelope. You are going to log into Damien's secure server, and you are going to transfer the deed of the Brooklyn Naval Yard to my holding company. If you don't do it in the next 10 minutes, I start mailing Arthur to you in small boxes. Damien's biometric firewalls are military grade. Penny lied smoothly, her mind racing. I can't authorize a deed transfer from an iPad. Don't play games with me. Costa barked, losing his cool. You manipulated Whitmore. You dodged my hit squad. I know you have the access. Do it, or the old man dies. Penny stared at the tablet. Costa was greedy, and greed made men stupid. She opened a new tab, accessing a highly restricted tracker program she had installed on Arthur's phone weeks ago to ensure his safety during sketchy client meetings. Okay, Costa, calm down, Penny said, softening her voice, playing the role of a terrified woman. I'm accessing the portal, but I need the routing numbers for your holding company. Smart girl, Costa purred, his ego soothed by her apparent submission. He rattled off a string of Cayman Island banking numbers. As he spoke, the GPS tracker pinged, a dilapidated warehouse in Red Hook. Penny wasn't just locating Arthur. She was typing the Cayman Island routing numbers into the Panamanian shell company she had just created. But she wasn't sending the deed. She was doing something much worse. Costa, tell me something, Penny asked, her fingers flying across the digital keyboard. How much are you paying the hitmen you sent after us last night? Because according to your routing accounts, which I'm currently looking at, your underboss has been skimming 20% off your payroll for the last 6 months. Silence on the line. What the hell are you talking about? Costa demanded. I have a degree in behavioral economics and corporate logistics, Lorenzo, Penny said, her voice dropping the terrified act, replacing it with pure, venomous ice. I don't just see the money. I see where it goes. I've just linked your secure Cayman accounts to an open-source Panamanian shell, and I've CC'd the transaction ledger to your underboss, your captains, and the FBI's racketeering division. You lying bitch. If you hurt one hair on Arthur's head, Penny interrupted, her voice ringing with absolute authority, I press enter, and your entire financial empire vaporizes. Your own men will kill you for stealing from them before the feds even get a warrant. Costa was breathing heavily into the phone. She had him cornered. But Penny wasn't relying solely on blackmail. Behind her, the heavy oak doors of the penthouse burst open. Damien stood there, flanked by Matteo and a dozen heavily armed men. He looked like the Grim Reaper in a bespoke suit, his eyes burning with a terrifying, murderous rage. He had tracked her phone the moment she engaged the dark web servers. Damien crossed the room in 3 massive strides, snatching the phone from Penny's hand. Costa, Damien whispered into the receiver, a sound so dark and full of death that the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. She isn't a secretary. She is my wife, and you have exactly 60 seconds to make your peace with God before I arrive in Red Hook. Damien crushed the phone in his massive hand, letting the shattered pieces fall to the marble floor. He turned to Penny, grabbing her by the shoulders, his eyes frantically scanning her for injuries. Are you hurt? The sniper, Damien demanded. There is no sniper, Penny said calmly, placing her hands on his chest, feeling the violent hammering of his heart. It was a psychological anchor to keep me contained. I traced his call. He's at the Red Hook warehouses. Damien stared at her, awe and obsession warring in his dark eyes. He pulled her flush against him, burying his face in her neck, inhaling her scent like a man drowning. Matteo, Damien ordered, not letting Penny go. Mobilize the strike team. We burn Red Hook to the ground. Nobody touches my queen. The rain lashed aggressively against the soundproof glass of the Ammon, New York penthouse, but inside, the silence was agonizing. Penelope sat at the massive marble island, her eyes fixed on the digital readouts of her tablet. The Panamanian shell company was fully operational, fortified by layers of encryption that not even the NSA could easily peel back. For 2 excruciating hours she had waited. She had fielded a frantic call from the elite corporate attorneys at Cravath, Swain and Moore, Harrison Whitmore's retained legal counsel. Thanks to Penny's flawless fabrication of the offshore logistics network, the notoriously ruthless lawyers had rubber-stamped the billion-dollar deed transfer. The Brooklyn Naval Yard officially belonged to the Russo syndicate, but Penny didn't care about the port anymore. Her heart was in Red Hook, beating inside the chest of a violent, beautiful man who had looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. At exactly 11:42 a.m., the heavy oak doors of the penthouse opened. Damien walked in. His bespoke suit was soaked, his tie gone, and his knuckles were bruised and split. A faint smear of blood stained his left cuff. Behind him, Arthur was being gently supported by Matteo, looking terrified and sporting a bruised cheek, but entirely alive. Penny bypassed the tablet, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor as she sprinted toward them. She bypassed Damien completely, throwing her arms around her boss. "Arthur, oh my God," she breathed, hugging the older man tightly. "I'm fine, Penny, I'm fine," Arthur stammered, offering a weak, trembling smile. Mr. Russo's men, they were incredibly efficient. Costa didn't even have time to unholster his weapon. Costa. Penny looked up at Damien, her hazel eyes searching his hard, impassive face. "Handled," Damien said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that sent a shiver down her spine. "When I showed the commission the financial ledger you compiled, the proof that Lorenzo was skimming from his own captains, they formally stripped him of his territory. His own underboss put a bullet in his knee before my men even breached the main office. Red Hook is ours." Matteo nodded respectfully to Penny. "I will take Arthur to the private medical wing downstairs, boss." As the doors clicked shut behind them, the massive penthouse suddenly felt dangerously small. Damien stood in the center of the room, radiating dark, predatory energy. He slowly stripped off his ruined suit jacket, tossing it over a custom leather chair. Penny took a deep breath, forcing her professional facade back into place. Her hands trembled slightly as she walked back to the kitchen island, closing out the encrypted browser tabs. "Whitmore's lawyers at Cravath cleared the paperwork 20 minutes ago," Penny said, staring at the blank screen so she wouldn't have to look at him. "The Panamanian tax shelter is legally airtight. You have operational control of Pier 4, and you saved $80 million in overhead. The retainer for Laura companions has been fulfilled." She reached for her left hand, her fingers gripping the heavy, breathtaking Cartier emerald-cut diamond. It was time to give up the fairy tale. She was the operations manager. He was the king of the underworld. The play was over. "What are you doing?" Damien's voice was dangerously quiet. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his large hand snapping out to cover hers, stopping her from pulling the ring past her knuckle. "Returning the prop," Penny whispered, finally looking up into his dark, storm-filled eyes. "My job is done, Damien. I played the wife. I secured the deal. I saved the agency." Damien didn't let go of her hand. Instead, his grip tightened, his thumb brushing over the massive diamond and resting against her soft skin. "I called Antonella this morning," Damien murmured, stepping closer until the heat of his body enveloped her. "I bought the dress. I called the jewelers and wired $2 million to secure the ring permanently. And I called Arthur on his secure line before we raided the warehouse." Penny's breath hitched. You bought the ring?" "I bought out your contract from the agency," Damien corrected, his gaze dropping to her lips before burning into her eyes. "You no longer work for Laura. You work for me, though work is entirely the wrong word." He reached his other hand around her waist, pulling her lush, full-figured body flush against his hard, muscular frame. Penny gasped as he backed her gently against the cool marble of the kitchen island. Damien, you walked into my world, Penelope, and you didn't just survive it. You conquered it, Damien said, his voice dripping with raw, unfiltered reverence. You didn't shrink yourself. You didn't quiet your mind. You took $1 billion empire and you bent it to your will. You saved my life, and then you crippled my greatest enemy with nothing but a tablet and your brilliant, terrifying mind. He leaned down, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her jawline, causing a violent shiver to rack her body. I have spent my life building a throne, assuming I would have to sit on it alone, he whispered against her skin. I don't want a fake wife, Penelope. I don't want a prop. I want my equal. I want a woman who takes up space in my life, in my bed, and in my empire. Penny looked at him, the walls she had spent years building around her heart, finally crumbling. For the first time in her life, a man wasn't asking her to change, to diet, or to hide in the background. The most powerful, dangerous man in the city was on his knees, metaphorically, begging her to rule beside him. I'm going to redesign your entire corporate structure, Penny breathed, a watery, triumphant smile breaking across her face. Your logistics are a mess. Damien let out a dark, booming laugh, capturing her lips in a bruising, desperate kiss. It was a promise signed in fire and velvet. She had stolen the show, but he had stolen her heart. And as his hands tangled in her hair, Penelope Gallagher knew she was never giving back the ring. Did Penelope's brilliant and unapologetic takeover of the underworld leave you entirely breathless? If you loved watching a fierce, plus-size mastermind outsmart a billionaire shipping magnate, outmaneuver a rival Mafia syndicate, and steal the heart of the city's most dangerous crime boss, you are not alone. Don't let the story end here. Hit that like button to show some love for a heroine who proudly takes up space. Share this video with anyone who loves high-stakes romance, dramatic plot twists, and absolute queens. And make sure to subscribe to our channel right now for more thrilling, addictive original stories every single week.